James Garfield wasn't born to greatness, but to trouble and hardship. Just before his second birthday, a wildfire threatened the family's homestead on the Ohio frontier. James's father saved the farm, but died soon afterward. His mother had little time for grief. Within days of the funeral, she was working in the fields. James would grow up at the raw edge of poverty.
As he got older, he absolutely detested his station in life. He had to face the scorn and the pity of people in the community. When he was 16, he hired himself out to a local farmer, and the farmer's daughter takes a liking to Garfield. And the father says to Garfield that no daughter of his is going to be seen with the likes of a poor boy like him.
To some men, Garfield would write, the fact that they came up from poverty is a matter of pride. I lament sorely that I was born poor. Books were rare in James's world, but those he did have were read over and over until he could recite them from memory.
As a teenager, Garfield was really intrigued by a book called The Pirate's Own. And he got this idea that he was going to sail the high seas.
My mother tried to turn my attention in other directions, Garfield later recalled. But I formed the determination to become a sailor. The blue expanse seemed a region of enchantment. The ocean was a long way from Ohio. Although James dreamed of the high seas, he had to settle for work as a crewman on the Ohio and Erie Canal.
He was on the canal one night and everyone else was asleep. He slips and he falls into the water. And he's desperately thrashing because he can't swim, and he feels this rope and he's pulling at it. But he knows that he hadn't tied it to anything on the boat. But miraculously it hooks and he's able to pull himself up onto the boat. To his mind, God had wanted to save him for a purpose, and he was supposed to do something larger with his life.
Of memory. William McKinley had already been president a full term when he was murdered at the turn of the 20th century. But James A. Garfield, in office less than 4 months when he was shot in 1881, is for most Americans an historical footnote. And that, says author Candace Millard, is a great shame.
He was, without question, one of the most extraordinary men ever elected president. He was absolutely brilliant. You know, he was born into incredible poverty.
In a log cabin.
In a log cabin, the last of the log cabin presidents. His father died before he was 2 years old. And so to put himself through college, his first year, he was a janitor and a carpenter. By his second year, they made him assistant professor of literature and ancient languages. By the time he was 26, he was this college's president. It was just one of these astonishing things. He just had an off-the-charts mind.
His loss is all the more heartbreaking, Millard writes in her recent book, because Garfield didn't need to die, even after he was shot. A Civil War hero and 9-term congressman, Garfield was drafted by fellow Republicans to run for president, an office he never sought.
He called the presidency a bleak mountain. He knew that it was going to be a very difficult and lonely position to be in. And, you know, this is the height of the spoils system.
The spoils system, under which anyone could petition the president in person for a government job, regardless of experience or ability. And so, could anyone just show up at the White House?
They could. I mean, he would have like 100 office seekers every day.
Charles Guiteau was one of those office seekers. Delusional and grandiose, he drifted through life.
This is a man who had failed at everything he had tried, and he had tried everything. You know, he had tried law, he had tried evangelism, he'd even tried a free love commune in the 1800s, and he had failed there too. You know, the women there had nicknamed him Charles Get Out.
Guiteau thought he should be named minister to France. Day after day, he visited the White House, even meeting Garfield once. But when his demand wasn't met,
he had what he believed was a divine inspiration, a message from God that he needed to kill the president. And you know, this is 16 years after Lincoln's assassination, but there's still no Secret Service protection.
On July 2nd, 1881, the president was scheduled to travel by train from D.C. to Massachusetts.
And so Guiteau woke up early that morning and he went to the train station and he had his shoes shined and he was ready with his gun and his papers.
Shoes shined?
Yeah, because he was very aware of the attention he would be receiving.
The president, along with two of his sons, arrived at the station.
So they walk in, Garfield takes just a few steps, Guiteau steps out of the shadows and shoots him twice, once in the arm and once in the back.
But the gunshot is not fatal.
It's not. It doesn't hit his spinal cord, it doesn't hit any vital organs.
Within minutes, doctors converged on the fallen president, using their fingers to poke and prod his open wounds.
12 different doctors inserted unsterilized fingers and instruments in Garfield's back, probing for this bullet, and the
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History as we hit you up with another election. This time it's 1880. The Republicans have been in power for 20 years, and there's a big old vacancy over the front door at the White House because Rutherford B. Hayes is going to walk away after one term. So let's take a look at the candidates, let's take a look at the campaign issues, and of course we're going to take a look at that big old electoral map. So giddy up for the learning. Let's go get her done right now. I'm a stalwart of the stalwarts. You're going to understand what that means by the end of this video. But we really have three candidates in the beginning of the Republican nomination, and none other than Ulysses S. Grant. The dude is back for a third term, and he's going to be running really against James Blaine, who was the Secretary of State, and he's a former senator from Maine. And James Blaine is much more of what's called a reformer or a half-breed. That's what they were called. And they really believe in civil service reform. They don't like political patronage. They don't like political machines. And Ulysses S. Grant, he's a stalwart. Stalwarts were a faction of these political machine politicians out of New York that Grant is aligning himself with. And really, it's a battle between him and Blaine, as well as John Sherman. William Tecumseh Sherman's brother, he's in the mix too. But at the end of the day, they're going through ballot after ballot after ballot. They get to 36 ballots when finally they introduce dark horse candidate, I love saying dark horse candidate, James Garfield, a House member out of the state of Ohio. And James Blaine teams up with John Sherman. They combine their votes to give the nomination to James Garfield, who's a little bit of a reformer. He's not a stalwart. How about that? So he's going to bring along with him for the ride a stalwart, and that would be Chester Arthur. And that's going to become really important because, spoiler alert, James Garfield gets shot in July of 1881. So the vice presidential choice is going to be really important. And in fact, when we get to his assassination, which I'm going to briefly mention because I've already made a video upon it, I'm going to say those words again. I am a stalwart of the stalwarts. So we have James Garfield. Basically, they believe in Republican principles like high tariffs to protect northern manufacturers. They believe in hard money principles to keep inflation down. They're not so keen on Chinese immigration. That's going to be an issue of the day because they're a little closer with the business community, but they're willing to work out that issue. And in terms of civil service reform, they have it on the platform, but in the past, that's been a problem for the Republican Party. So we have James Garfield, we have Chester Arthur. Let's put them up into the cage here and see what happens when we go nominate ourselves a Democrat and a populist. Another spoiler alert. We're going to have another populist, another party. So the Democrats can't seem to win an election. You know, the whole secession and starting the Civil War thing is kind of hanging over their heads. And the Republicans have been pounding into their brains every 4 years. The Democrats accuse the Republicans of waving the bloody shirt. So in their nomination process, it comes down to two candidates. First, they have a conservative candidate in Delaware Senator Thomas Bayard. He's a very traditional Democratic states' right kind of candidate with a long record. Or they can go with a wild card. They could do that. They could go with Major General Scott Hancock. And Hancock is a Union general. Hancock is in charge of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. So it's going to be a little bit harder to wave that bloody shirt when you have a hero at Gettysburg on top of that Democratic ticket. So at the end of the day, that's who they go for. We have a wild card pick, not a politician, a citizen, a soldier out of West Point, Major General Hancock. In a nod to the party apparatus, he's going to bring along with him for the ride William English, a House member out of the state of Indiana, which was a swing state, and he's a conservative Democrat, so he's shoring up his support in the Democratic Party. But now we got ourselves a contest. We have on one side of the aisle James Garfield, and now we have Major General Hancock. But wait, spoiler alert, one more dude's going to show up to the party. So we have James B. Weaver, who's going to be running under the Greenback Party. This is really one of the first populist parties in American history. They're not going to do tremendously well, pulling at about 300,000 votes, but when you look at how close this race is, it is a little bit of a factor. And it's interesting just to bring it up because it is a populist party. James B. Weaver traveled around the country with his message of the Greenbacks, which was that we needed to have a larger money supply, that people couldn't couldn't borrow money, that there just wasn't enough money in the system when we were relying on gold. So during the Civil War, the federal government, in order to widen the money supply, began issuing paper currency called greenbacks. Now, after the Civil War, the Republican Party and pretty much the Democratic Party believe in more hard money principles, and they're starting to retreat from greenbacks and they're withdrawing them from circulation. And a lot of people, there's kind of an economic panic in the 1870s, believe that we need to have a wider money supply. And this is really going to cross party lines. It's seen as being more of a spin-off of the Republican Party, but you certainly have a lot of poor whites and blacks in the South and in the West that are attracted to this idea. So Weaver is going to travel around the country with this platform. And not only that platform, but racial justice. They believed in an 8-hour working day. They want to end child labor. They want to regulate big business. This is a very early formation of a populist party that's later going to become the Populist Party and eventually affect the Democratic Party, where, oh my God, FDR, what am I doing? I'm getting way ahead of myself. So we have our 3 candidates now. Let's take a look at the election itself, and then we're getting to the big map. I can't wait. Aren't you excited? I'm so excited. So in the beginning of the campaign, at least, the Republicans are waving that bloody shirt saying that we can't hand power back over to the Democrats, and the Democrats are screaming about the 1876 election, which they believed was rigged and stolen from them, and the candidates are really trying to stay out of the limelight, letting the political machines fight their battles for them, and there's not a humongous difference on some of those big issues. The hard money issue, there's not a lot of differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, and there's certainly not a lot of differences between the Democrats and the Republicans when it comes to protecting black rights in the South or anything like that. But there is a difference between them on tariffs. Garfield supports a high tariff, and of course that Hancock is going to support a low tariff, and part of that Democratic platform is going to be used against him, which said that the only tariffs we should have are for revenue only. And that became a calling point for the Republican Party in the North, trying to fracture the Democratic coalition. Before this election, guys, most of those maps are mixed. You have Democrats winning in the North and Republicans winning in the South. But now you're going to have a solid Democratic South as the Democratic coalition falls apart. You have to remember that there are Democrats in the North, and most of those Democrats are immigrants and Catholics, people that would be considered working class. So when this information comes out that he's so against any type of tariffs, there's a fear in that community that there's going to be a loss of jobs because the federal government isn't protecting U.S. manufacturers. So they're going to fall out of the Democratic camp and start aligning with the Republican Party. So that's going to be a big deal. There's also an October surprise. Don't you love October surprises? At the end of the election, there was a rumor that was circulated that James Garfield was in cahoots with the business community to make sure that we didn't have limits on Chinese immigration. There's a lot of nativism in the country, and the Democrats are capitalizing on that, saying that the Republicans are going to keep those Chinese here for cheap wages. Now, the story wasn't true, but 100,000 flyers had gotten out to the West Coast and circulated around the states of California, Nevada, and Oregon, and that actually does influence the vote out there. Both candidates have pretty similar stances on civil service reform. Of course, there are Democrats that are trying to link Garfield to the credit mobilier scandal, and there might have been kind of a soft link in there, but that doesn't take a humongous hold in the country. But other than that, it really is a personality contest between these two guys, and now we're going to take these two guys along with that Weaver dude. Now, Weaver is a populist. He's not staying on his porch. He's going around the country giving wild speeches. In fact, he's even going down south to bring his message of economic equality and the greenback issue, but he's also talking about racial equality, and some of those rallies got quite violent and had to be shut down, and Weaver's not going to have that much success down south. All right, guys, why don't we get to the results, because that's the best part. Best part. All right, guys, it's time to bring the big map and throw her up on the wall here, and I want you to make sure that you stare at it for longer than 10 seconds and get used to it, because this this map is pretty much going to stay just like that until we get to the 1950s, another 70 years down the road. So poof, there it is, guys. That's the solid South. Hancock is going to sweep that Southern vote. In fact, in future elections, the Republicans aren't really going to bother with that strategy because, as you can see, they can win an election without the South. And in fact, that's what they did. They're going to win swing states like Indiana and Pennsylvania and Ohio. In fact, Hancock is from Pennsylvania. And when we look at that electoral breakdown, we can see that it looks like a rompling. It's rompling. Is that a word? Well, anyway, Garfield gets 214 votes, 155 votes for Mr. Hancock. But if you take his home state of Pennsylvania into the mix, and I think I've done the math correctly, it ends up as a 184-184 tie. But of course, that didn't occur. But look at that popular vote. Wow! We're talking about a difference of 1,888 votes out of almost 9 million votes cast. It's really close. In fact, California, right? Hancock wins by 20 votes. Maybe some of those flyers had an impact out there. But at the end of the day, it's just not enough. This is without a doubt the closest popular vote we've had in American history, and we have ourselves a winner. James Garfield is the legitimate electoral winner of the contest of 1880, and he's the new president. Now, normally I would start my whole, so there you go, guys, subscribe and all that, but I'm not going to do that because there's a little end clip to this story which ends up.
Guiteau follows him everywhere. He even follows him to church. He sits behind Garfield and he disagrees with something the minister says and he shouts out. And Garfield, that night, writes in his diary about this young man, shouting in church. Guiteau is absolutely spinning out of control.
To the American people, I conceived the idea of removing the president because he has proved a traitor to the men that made him. This is not murder. It is a political necessity. This will make my friend Arthur president and save the republic. I expect President Arthur and Senator Conklin will give the nation the finest administration it has ever had.
It's been such an incredibly stressful and difficult 4 months, and he's so looking forward to this opportunity to get away from Washington and the White House.
Hail the conquering hero, Sir Blaine. You've vanquished your enemies. And now you're being reunited with your bride. It's a red letter day at the White House, sir. I was raised to be wary of good fortune, but I can't help feeling a little bullish today. And so you should, after the fight you've had. Well, you'll have to excuse me, but I'm due at the train station. I'd like to have a word with you about Vice President Arthur. Why don't you come along?
Charles Guiteau had read about the president's trip in the newspaper. It was the opportunity he'd been waiting for.
That's enough. I have an appointment.
That morning, he had risen early, taken a stroll in Lafayette Park, eaten a hearty breakfast, then walked across town to the Baltimore and Potomac railway station. In his pocket were 2 letters, one to William Tecumseh Sherman, Chief of the Army, and the other addressed to the White House.
The president's tragic death is a sad necessity, but it will unite the Republican Party and save the Republic. I presume the president is a Christian and that he will be happier in paradise than here. It will be no worse for Mrs. Garfield to part with her husband this way than by natural death.
He's thinking, my life is going to change now, too. I'm going to be famous, and I'm going to get everything that I deserve, that I've been entitled to for so long.
First examination took place on the train station floor. I mean, you can't imagine a more germ-infested environment.
American doctors at the time didn't believe germs existed at all. And according to Dr. Jeffrey Resnick of the National Library of Medicine, they rejected the use of antiseptics pioneered by Joseph Lister, for whom Listerine would later be named.
Lister, an Englishman, embraced this theory in the early 1860s based upon the fact that it's germs that cause disease. American doctors did not believe in the Listerian theory because they subscribed to the miasma theory. Bad air caused disease and illness, not germs. Germs you couldn't see.
On the scene at the train station, cabinet member Robert Todd Lincoln. Present at his father's death 16 years before, he would also witness the murder of McKinley 20 years later.
Of the 4 presidential assassinations, he was there for 3 of them.
A pretty ghoulish distinction.
That's right. It's unfortunate.
It was Lincoln who summoned Dr. D. Willard Bliss. The D stood for doctor, his actual first name.
And Bliss was a uniquely arrogant and ambitious man, and he just took charge.
There would be no second opinions. For an excruciating 80 days, made even worse by the sweltering Washington summer, Garfield suffered stoically as his condition worsened.
He is riddled with infection at this point. He has these abscesses all through his body.
And he was starving to death. Unable to keep down the sumptuous meals he was being fed, the president's weight plunged from 210 pounds to 130. In a panic to find the bullet still lodged in Garfield, Bliss called on Alexander Graham Bell. Yes, that Bell, the inventor of the telephone. Bell's task? Use the metal detector he'd invented to find the bullet so it could once and for all be extracted. But unbeknownst to Bell, Garfield was lying on a bed made of metal springs, rare at the time.
Which is obviously going to affect a metal detector. But worse than that, Bliss believed and had publicly stated that the bullet was on the right side of the president's body, and he would only let Bell examine that part of the president's body. And of course, the bullet had gone to the left.
Once again, just willful ignorance?
You know, it's just one of the incredible dangers of ambition, you know, and he did not want to be proven wrong.
President Garfield finally died on September 19, 1881. The autopsy confirmed Bliss's ignorance.
President Garfield didn't have to die. President Garfield died because of what his doctors did and what they didn't do.
But from this senseless horror came good. The use of antiseptics was quickly accepted by American doctors. Civil service reform was enacted. And perhaps even more significantly,
one of the most important things that happened is it really brought the country together for the first time since the Civil War.
It connected the North and the South?
It did. It did. It healed this deep, deep, deep wound because there was this common sorrow and this understanding of loss.
As for the man who shot the president, Charles Guiteau would be hanged, only aware at the very end that he would not be celebrated for killing the president.
There's a quote in your book from Guiteau where he says something like, It's the doctors that murdered Garfield.
That's right. He says, you know, yes, I shot him, but his doctors killed him.
This insane person actually says something sane.
That's right. And it's true. Unfortunately, it's absolutely true.
Dear Mrs. Garfield, this morning, while reading one of the many accounts of our dear President's heroism, I was so overcome that I thought I would write and tell you how very, very much I felt for you. I have not offered a single prayer since our President was first shot, but that was for his recovery. My Papa and Mama do not know that I've written this, but I felt I must do it. Our dear President has gone from our love to the love of God and his angels.
James Garfield had been in office just 200 days. Already, many Americans had come to see in his youth, brilliance, and kindness the makings of a truly great president. But now he was dead, brought down by an assassin, and, some believed, his own doctors.
comfort is taken care of.
Garfield is on the floor of the station. So someone finds an old horsehair and hay mattress. They put the president on that and take him to a room upstairs.
Doctor, what do you need?
Blankets.
You! Go!
Garfield's first concern was for his wife, Lucretia.
Sir, what can I do?
Lucretia, tell her I'm all right.
He wanted to make sure that when she heard about this, she heard it from him.
Don't you worry. I'll send a telegram.
Let me through, please. Please, it's Dr. Bliss. I know the man.
Within minutes, 10 different physicians rushed to the train station.
Gently. Easy. Flesh wound on the right arm. Entry wound in the back.
They didn't know the exact track of the bullet. They couldn't tell how much damage it had done.
I'm worried about his liver. Mr. President, I have to probe for the bullet. This is going to be painful. Hold him steady, gentlemen. Ready? Easy. Set him back down. It's remarkable, sir. I've done that hundreds of times. I've never seen a man hold that steady.
Did you get it?
No. Try to relax.